Welcome to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. This week is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, the first week of May every year. And organizations like Postpartum Support International and many others, and here on this podcast, we are being as loud as possible about letting people know that perinatal mental health conditions exist, that mothers need support, that resources are available. And one of the ways that I do this on this podcast is sharing people's stories. And on this episode, I am very happy to welcome Sarah Hoover. She has released a book this year, The Motherload, Episodes from the Brink of Motherhood, which is a beautiful and raw and vulnerable and real story. It highlights some of the ways in which we as a society fail mothers and some really intimate looks at the internal process that she had going through the pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. She is a writer, cultural critic, and former Gagosian director whose work spans art, fashion, motherhood, and feminism. After earning degrees from NYU and Columbia, she built a career in the art world before turning to writing. Her essays on motherhood, identity, and cultural expectations have appeared in Vogue, The Strategist, and Harper's Bazaar. Her debut memoir, The Motherload, Episodes from the Brink of Motherhood, is a darkly funny, unfiltered critique of modern motherhood, praised by Oprah Daily as a long overdue reality check. Hoover also teaches at Barnard, co-founded the Accelerator Committee at American Ballet Theater, and serves on the board of Art Production Fund. She's been featured in The New Yorker, The Cut, Vanity Fair, The New York Times, and so much more. She lives in Manhattan with her husband and two kids, where a lot of her story takes place. I'm happy for you to hear this interview with Sarah and for you to learn about her book. So let's dive in and meet Sarah. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I had the opportunity to listen to your book, and that for me was a real treat to just be able to hear your experience in your voice, in your words, and you're a beautiful writer. And I came
Thank
to
you.
understand that through your book. Why?
I'm glad you're not sick of hearing my voice yet.
No, not at all. I'm happy to. So, yeah, I would love for you to share with the listeners a bit of your story and then how you came to write this book, but certainly start wherever you'd like with what you went through.
Okay. I had my first child 7 years ago, and I had not a medically significant birth experience. There was no emergency situation. Alarms didn't go off. I didn't have to have a last minute C-section or anything like that. And yet I found the experience of giving birth in a medical setting extraordinarily traumatizing. It triggered memories for me that I didn't think were significant at the time of sexual assaults I had experienced in my 20s and some other pretty standard traumas of my life as a woman being in her early 30s in the world. And as a consequence, I was very disassociated for much of the birth process. And when they pulled my baby out after 19 and a half hours of labor and put him on my body, I felt like completely disconnected from him. I had long expected and been looking forward to that explosion of love and I don't know, hormones when you first gaze upon the face of your newborn. And I didn't have that at all. I didn't even have an ounce of curiosity about him. I was just terrified and shut down from what I had been through in the last day and could not see how I would ever be able to reconcile this new identity as a mom. And when I looked at him, I just saw all the things that I perceived as being wrong with him.
It's super intense. Obviously, nobody
Yeah.
had given you a heads up that this kind of thing might happen.
No. Or if they had, I hadn't been able to hear them. And I had been a little bit depressed in my pregnancy, but because had really bad morning sickness for almost the whole time, and I certainly didn't feel like my OB understood how truly depressing that was for me. I had also experienced in someone very close to me a stillbirth right before I got pregnant, and there was just this storm, this perfect stew of triggers that made the entire experience from pregnancy to birth dark and ominous. And then once the baby came out, I really felt nothing, and it set me up perfectly to have a postpartum depression that was arduous and lasted until my child was a year. And I finally got the kind of help that like really resonated and worked for me. But it took a long time for me to even figure out what was wrong and like to be able
Yeah.
to ask for the kind of help I needed.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I really appreciated listening to your story is, oh, this is, I guess, my interpretation of it is the kind of turmoil that you had internally, the thought processes that you had, the detail of angst and lots of words of what you were going through, but that it was hard to translate that to anybody or hard to say it out loud, or that nobody really could perceive that as what was happening for you.
Yeah, I was like an award-winning actress the whole time because I felt so
Mhm.
much pressure from every story I had ever heard about having a baby.
Right.
I thought that it made me like a real failure as a woman, that I didn't feel immediately connected with the maternal parts of me and that I didn't feel immediately connected with my baby. And I felt myself parroting these responses that I had heard a million times. Like
Right.
I would see someone who would say, "Oh my God, how is it being a mom?" And my like immediate go to was like, "It's so magical. It's amazing." All the things I had heard other mothers say a jillion times. And I like knew at the time as it was coming out, I was like, I don't actually feel this way. I actually hate this. I'm miserable. I don't
Right.
feel fulfilled. It's not fun. I don't find joy in any of it. But I thought to say that truth out loud would be like really monstrous and that people wouldn't be able to relate to it and that it would just prove that I was like not good at being a good girl.
Oh, it sucks. And like that feeling of when you know you're lying to yourself. In some ways, again, I'm just using my own interpretation. It's kind of like betraying how you actually feel, and having to put that facade out there is just makes it so much more painful, I think. Is that your
Yeah.
experience?
It makes it more lonely for sure. And I think like women are really trained to do that all day long. Like we're
For sure.
all used to being like, no, I love wearing high heels. These ones are totally comfortable. Oh, I could run in these ones. Like we all parrot the
Mhm.
same sort of mini lies that like make us more palatable in society. And I was so good at that, like A plus, gold star. And there, but it wore on me. It wore and wore on me because there was no one that I could say like, even to my husband, I felt so ashamed. It took me a long time to realize my truth. I
Sure,
believed
sure.
my own lies for a bit, but then
Yeah, yeah.
once I was, wow, this is like really not how I feel. Even to my husband, I felt that I couldn't look at him and say, "Are you as miserable as I am? Like,
Mm,
what am I doing wrong that
mhm,
this doesn't come naturally to me?" Like, I was so embarrassed of that fact. And also thought if I just keep pretending, it'll get better.
mhm.
Because it seems really good for all these women around me. And some of them like work outside of the home and have a identity that is more similar to mine than to some of the like I'm from Indiana, and a lot of the women that I grew up with are full-time moms and caregivers, and they don't work outside of the home, and they like it's more common there, I think. But
Mhm,
a lot of them are genuinely really fulfilled by that, right?
mhm,
And I remember being like so jealous and being like, why am I not more like that? Like,
mhm.
why? What did I not? What lesson did I not pick up? But I thought, okay, maybe they just faked it until they made it, and I need to be doing the same thing.
Sure. Because if nobody's talking about it, you're just kind of left to make your own assumptions about how people get
Yeah.
through. And just in terms of your background, you were pretty career driven also
Yes.
before
Yeah.
this happened.
Yes, I like worked in a large international art gallery where I worked since I was in graduate school. I had lived in New York since I went to college when I just turned 18,
Mhm.
and I had my first child at 33. So I had been in New York longer than I'm really bad at math, but I've been in New York a long time. I felt like a New Yorker, and I felt like my fully formed adult identity was in New York, and a large part of my identity was the work I did in the art world at this gallery. And I was a young director there and ahead of the curve and where I was in the trajectory of my career. And I loved my job, and
Mhm.
it was the kind of job where you like work days and nights,
Yeah.
and I felt really alive doing that. Like it
Mhm.
was really fun. I was incredibly passionate about it. There was no part of me that didn't want to go back to work. And in fact, when my baby was born and my husband got to go back to work after we got home from the hospital, I remember being like, oh my God, take me with you. Like
Right.
I would love to do that. Yeah, I'm wearing an adult diaper and a girdle. And I look like a weird stretched out balloon version of myself, but I would rather be anywhere but here. And all I wanted to do was turn back the clock and reclaim that identity that I had worked really hard to build. Like I had gone
Years.
to extra school and put in
Mhm.
years of effort and worked late nights and early mornings and weekends to get where I was. And I loved being there. And I could not reconcile. It felt profoundly unfair to me that part of this transition and part of being a woman was that I didn't get to go right back to that.
And the light switch, you were doing it and then you were not.
Yeah, the day I was in labor, I like was working all day,
Mhm.
and I went to dance cardio that morning. I got what I now know is amniotic fluid all over my pants.
Got
Like
it.
I I loved the way my life was set up, and all of a sudden it felt ripped for me. And I thought that rupture would be replaced by this incredible, overpowering love for this new creature. And when I didn't feel that love, which I attribute to the trauma of my labor, when I didn't feel that love, I was like, this wasn't worth it. Like, then why did I do all this if I don't even get to love this thing?
And it was hard to be connected during pregnancy anyways. Like you didn't
Yeah, I
have
was
that time to
very,
incubate.
no, I was so sick in that pregnancy, and I was also very fearful because I had seen what a loss looks like up close. And I understood the statistics and the very real possibility. Like, stillbirth is not uncommon. I think it's in 1 out of 100 births and in a late term death of the fetus. And not great odds, right? Like, I wouldn't
For
do
sure.
anything else that was 1 out of 100 chances of a failure at that level. I would really question. And I think most women like aren't even aware of that, but I had seen it. I had been in the room. And once you see that, it's very hard to unsee. Once you're that literate in death, it's very hard to unsee. And I wasn't in therapy at the time, and I hadn't like really processed witnessing stillbirth. And so I spent every second of my first pregnancy afraid that was going to happen to me. I think
Absolutely.
wrote in the book, like every time I pulled my pants down to pee, which, when you're pregnant is 4,000 times a day,
Right,
I
right.
expected to see blood in the toilet bowl and I thought it was all going to be over. And it was just like a really heavy weight to carry. It was really oppressive. And it was a dark cloud that loomed over the whole pregnancy experience. I didn't have a baby shower. I didn't want to celebrate. I didn't want to decorate a nursery. I never had that feeling of wanting to nest. I never felt celebratory because I knew how quickly it could all be taken away. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to feel like so elated. And when the baby comes and he's healthy and I'm like holding him, I'm going to be awash in like joy that
Right,
I made it and he made it.
right.
And I just felt so depleted by that point.
Absolutely. And trying to hold out hope for that kind of a moment. First of all, it's a shit ton of pressure to have
Totally.
on that. And then like the hope that you're going to be relieved of whatever this is that you're dealing with. And then it's not only are you not relieved, it like doubles down from the birth experience.
Yeah, I felt really stuck. I think it would have been really different if I had been working through all of it in some kind of therapy. But I just didn't really have anyone to talk to about any of it. And I don't think my husband understood the severity of my fear and my sadness.
Mhm.
And I felt like really unseen. But on this book tour that I've been on now for whatever, 8, 7 weeks, I've been meeting hundreds of women, and women en masse feel really unseen. They feel really underappreciated and
Yep.
misunderstood for what the birth and pregnancy and newborn experience is for them. I think it's really
Yep.
frustrating for a lot of people who feel like culturally pretty ignored and not appreciated for going through all of this.
Absolutely. And throughout the book, you talk a lot about your relationship with your husband and very candidly, which I appreciate. And I think from what I read, he was said, like, go ahead, say whatever you need to say.
Yeah. Actually,
But
what he said was, you can make me sound worse if you want. And I was like, I don't need to, buddy. You
you
were
did it fine
pretty
on your own.
annoying and useless on your own. It's so funny. There's a scene in my book that you read about how, like, when I was in labor, he like disappeared to go eat a hot dog or whatever. And
Mhm.
every woman I talk to has a story about how their partner failed them in labor. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think are emotionally complex enough to be able to hang out and handle 19 hours that we have to handle.
You have no choice in the matter
Yeah.
when you're birthing. Yeah, there are a lot of ways in which that happens. And to go back a little bit to what you said about just society and culture, like men are definitely not brought up to have an understanding of what this is really and to sure maybe revere it or understand it's a big deal on some level, but it's just they can't get it because they're never going to go through it
And
in that
also
same way.
because they never read or see story, it's not depicted. Like, I don't know how any man could understand it. I didn't understand it before I went through it.
Mhm,
No
mhm.
one ever handed me a manual. I had what to expect when you're expecting, which is honestly great, but it's also like pretty clinical. And I had to write the Motherload because there was no Motherload that I could read. Like, I read every book that covered these topics out there, and none of them felt thorough and complete and like they really resonated for me. I always sensed that the author was like holding back, trying to be super respectful, not wanting to say the unsayable. And I was like, this doesn't do anyone any favors. Like, someone at some point is actually going to have to be honest about their experience here. Not like my experience is everybody's experience, but I was like, at least one person is going to have to tell their truth for these floodgates to open, because otherwise it's such a disservice. I don't know what books you read in high school, but like, I didn't read a lot of first person accounts of what it's like to be a woman. I didn't read the Bell Jar till I was in college. I read like the Odyssey. Okay, that doesn't teach you a lot about the inner emotional life of what it is to be a woman in 2025 America.
For sure, it doesn't. Yeah, and speaking to that, I agree with you. It's the way in which you were honest about your relationship with your mom and your husband, I think was just so important. And to your point, like as I was listening, I was like, oh, like that feeling of that's a real thing that you're talking about, the relationship. And I love the kind of arc that there was with the relationship with your mom and your husband. But the realness of it was, I hate to use this word, it was like refreshing. That's not like the right word to use, but just that you were able to be honest, because there are so many, and I hear this in sessions all the time about the complexities of relationships with parents, and in particular moms, and in particular moms that aren't super emotionally in tune or connected, and
Yeah.
the impact that has.
It was something that giving birth really casts a huge light on for me. I had always felt very close to my mom in a lot of ways, and she's like very cool. She's a very cool, interesting person. So it's not like our politics didn't match, or I couldn't relate to her because she like had never been to New York City and couldn't believe I lived there. There was no, the fundamental ways in which my mother and I view the world are very aligned. So I always felt very close to her in that way. But something I realized once I had kids was like the ways I had always interpreted what I saw as her ambivalence towards being my mother as a byproduct of the fact that she didn't like me, or that she didn't really like mothering, or that I wasn't the kid she wanted, or that I was a burden on her, and that I took her away from what she really wanted to be doing, which was a job outside of the home. And once I had kids, I understood how much more complicated it is than that, and that every woman, mother or not, deserves to have access to their full identity and to have a career if they want to, and not just to be a mother if that's not the only thing that they need to feel fulfilled and full in this world. And I wish that, like, as a kid, I had a mom who had the language to say, Mommy's going to work, not because she doesn't love you, but because mommies sometimes want stuff that's not just their family, to make them feel like a whole person, and you deserve that too when you grow up, and you'll have that too. But she didn't have that language. I like
Right.
internalized her leaving as me being like a burden as a daughter, me being annoying as a daughter. And I really got that once I had my own kids, that like you do still deserve to have your full identity. It's like this weird typecasting that patriarchy has put us in this box, where the gold standard of what it means to be a woman is to just like love being a mom and not wanting to do anything else. And that's not one size fits all. Like, that doesn't work for everyone. But I
For
really
sure.
had to think a lot about my relationship with her and the ways that she parented and the choices that she made and why she made them. And like, a great revelation of writing this book is that my mom realized that she had postpartum depression after I was born, but was obviously untreated. The words didn't exist then, so it was never
Right.
treated.
Right. Yeah, and that is again like psychologically going through the therapy process and understanding those intricacies of relationships and the interplay and how it affects us in these sometimes subtle ways, sometimes hit you over the head ways, are all of the sudden in your face after you have a kid. It's not okay, yeah, your life changed. That's for sure true. And that's enough to blow your mind. But then all this other stuff starts popping up, your own past, your own history, that now you have to deal with that too while you're like sleep deprived and leaking and all of the
It's a
things.
crash course. It's a real crash course. And like, for me, I didn't have systems in place or resources to manage the crash course. So I ended up like really going off the deep end. I think had I just had proper therapy and people to talk to so I didn't feel so alone, like, it is very manageable. It's honestly a huge gift
Mhm.
to have these opportunities to like really re-examine your life and your choices and the meaning of everything that you've been through. Like birth is incredibly spiritual if you let it be.
Yeah.
I just didn't have anyone to like guide me through that, and I was so lost that it just tipped me over the edge, and I like went into the deep darkness because I didn't know how to manage any of those thought processes on my own.
And at what point, I can't recall right now, but at what point did you actually get support, the help that you needed?
When I was a year postpartum, I was sitting at my kitchen table and looking out of the window and thinking of like ways to die and wondering if I walked off my balcony, if it would hurt. And some little voice in my head was like, that's not normal. That's not a normal thought. And 2 days later, I went to my annual doctor's appointment, like my normal checkup. And the doctor just asked me the right questions. She asked me if I liked playing with my kid and like a few other things. And it was just like the right time to have asked me that because I had just had this little voice in my head saying, something's wrong about the way you're looking at the world right now. You're like on the edge of something, you're on the precipice of something really scary. And also, I could just hear the doctor or some, I'm sure maybe someone else had asked me those questions in the last year, but the way that she asked them was just really perfect and conversational and natural. And I didn't feel like put on the spot. I opened up to her like a little bit. I was like, yeah, I'm like, I don't love playing with my kid and I feel disconnected from my husband. And we were just having a girl conversation. And she looked right at me and she was like, I think you're in crisis and you don't realize it. And you got to do something because you're going to blow up your whole life. And I was like, what? Like, I had no idea. I had taken this Edinburgh postnatal depression scale. I had printed it out a million times and taken it ad nauseum, just praying that one day I would get a score low enough that meant that I like needed help or something. Like, I needed proof that something was wrong with me. And I couldn't really find it anywhere because that test didn't really like hit with me. And I tried reading all these books and none of them like were my story. And I was Googling stuff on the internet and like just none of it was right. None of it made me feel seen. And when she said that, I was like, oh, like I guess something is wrong. If this pretty much stranger who I see twice a year is noticing that maybe, and no one in my life was, it's not like my husband was like, you seem really sad. We got to get you help. He just thought I was mad at him all the time. Because also one of my big symptoms was rage.
Yeah.
And I was mad at him all the time. So when she said that, I was like, oh my God, I got to get a new therapist because I had been dabbling in therapy, but not with someone I connected to. I was like, I got to find like a really good therapist and I got to get a grip on this because like, I don't know if I'll ever enjoy being a mom and I don't know if I'll ever if I'll stay married to this guy. I don't know, but I want just, if I'm going to be on this earth, like I got to find a way to be happy. And I'm just really profoundly dissatisfied in my life. So she was like a real catalyst for me getting a different therapist and considering taking antidepressants. And both of those things were the first steps to treating the mental illness that I had.
I thank you for that. And I'm glad you brought up the screening questionnaire because I wanted to ask you about your experience with them. A lot of people have described that it doesn't capture everything. And that particular scale is like mostly depression questions and a couple of anxiety questions. But a lot of questionnaires don't capture that rage part, that like intense anger thing. So it sounds like with you like repeatedly taking it, you were trying almost, again, my interpretation, like trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what was going on. And that scale to me was like the only real doctor approved resource that I had.
Mhm.
It's really old. It hasn't been revamped. It's not like there's 20 versions of it out there and you can pick the one you like. It's just that. And I had been given it in the hospital. I'd been given it my 6 week checkup. And the questions are pretty vague and they don't offer like real world comps. I think one of them is about like how many times you cry a day, but I don't know. On a good day when I have PMS, I cry 3 times anyway. I don't think that's like an indicator. It's like everything is in comparison to your baseline, right? And everyone's baseline is different. So like that alone is a reason that it doesn't totally work for me. But and it offered no real world examples of things. It doesn't talk about rage at all. Like a huge symptom for me is that I fixate on death. Doesn't ask about that. And that's very common, I hear from many women. It doesn't ask about how the birth process made me feel.
Mhm.
I think many women that I've spoken to now, I understand this is anecdotal, but I've talked to so many women now who perceive the way they were treated in birth and the trauma of their birth to be the instigating incident for postpartum mental health issues,
For sure.
which is like a no-brainer to me. I mean,
Mhm.
I saw the connection so clearly. Like I completely shut down. I remember it was like a dark wall coming down in my brain, being like, "You have to protect yourself. This is terrifying, and you might die,
Mhm.
and you have to shut off the part of you that is emotionally invested here because you may not make it out, and your baby may not make it out." And like I remember my brain doing that, and I'm certainly not alone because I didn't even have anything that scary happen. And if you've been sexually assaulted before in your life, I
Mhm.
think that's a huge trigger because
It is.
the place the baby comes out of, this is so obvious, right? But yeah, that questionnaire is not particularly like trauma informed. It didn't speak to me, and I ended up really resenting it because it felt to me just like a way that an insurance company or a doctor could check a box and be like, we're no longer liable because she passed the test we gave her. It just felt
Mhm.
like a issue of liability more than of actually caring about my condition.
So you didn't, as far as you remember, nobody gave you resources along the way to look into or think about?
Sure, I think the hospital gave me, like, a pamphlet of what postpartum depression looked like or, like, somewhere I could call, but they were meaningless. They were like,
Mhm.
I don't know, it would be the equivalent of giving someone a cold a textbook about how colds work. Like, I didn't have a
Mhm.
single firsthand first-person story about what postpartum depression looked like in someone's real lived life and
Mhm.
how it could apply to me. I sat at my kitchen table and thought of ways to die, and at no point did I think to myself, "This is what it means to be suicidal. Call a therapist, call a
Mhm.
doctor." I
Mhm.
thought to myself, probably people say new motherhood's really hard. Everyone's told me that, and this is probably what they meant. Like the way that women excuse away their own pain
Mhm.
and suffering is ingrained upon us from birth. So
For
there was
sure.
no world where like a pamphlet that someone handed me at the hospital was going to save me from that and make me able to be like, "Oh no, I have it."
For sure, especially if you're already feeling like you're failing or feeling like a failure. It ends up just being like more evidence to that.
Yeah.
Like you can't escape it unless there's something that like really pulls you out of
The
you
only
know.
thing that I think would have been helpful is having 10 versions of the Motherload to read and being like, "Oh my god, I relate to this. Like I felt this feeling and this feeling. I guess I have postpartum depression too, and I guess there's hope for me if I get a therapist and I'm really honest about this." But
Mhm.
without any like real example, I had no clue that I even qualified.
Yeah, that as I said before, the honesty in your book and the detail of your thought processes that you share are, I'm sure, have been such a lifeline to people already. Is
I
that
hope
what you're
so.
getting?
Yeah, yes, I do hear that from a lot of people. Many people are like really shocked by the honesty, and it is hard to break, like to start being really honest. I had to like practice in the mirror a lot, saying some of this stuff out loud before I could even say it to my therapist. But because there's so much shame involved. But I think once you like break down that wall and grow accustomed to being emotionally vulnerable, it gets easier and it's very rewarding because you take away like the power of the shame that you felt about things pretty quickly. Like I
Mhm.
have absolutely, there was a time in my life that I can remember very recently where I couldn't say the words I've been sexually assaulted. Like,
Mhm.
it would make me start crying to even try and say that, and I would think,
Mhm.
"Oh my god, does it even count? Like, I went to that guy's house willingly." And now I can, like it's the same as saying the sky is blue. Like, it
Mhm.
doesn't,
Mhm.
impact me emotionally, but you have to get really used to saying those truths and practice them, and, like, I don't think most women have the opportunity to do that, nor are they encouraged culturally to do that.
No.
And so when they read something as honest as my book, as emotionally honest as my book, they're like I think people find it really shocking.
Mhm.
And I'm like very conditioned to it now where I'm just like, it is true. It is what happens. I don't know. I don't know what else to do. Like I have no clue if I'm good at writing. That's very nice that you said I was. Thank you.
I
But
think you're amazing.
thank you. But like I don't know. I don't have an MFA. I've never there aren't like fancy poets who read my book and tell me it's good. What I cared about was telling a truth that I knew would have benefited me to read and
Mhm.
to just not be scared and to just be brave and do it even if it was like embarrassing or made me look bad or made people, I don't know, think that I'm spoiled or whatever people's worst takeaways might be. I was like, I'm just going to do this because it's the one thing I wish I had. It was the one lifeline that someone could have tossed me that might have actually worked. And like people's reactions have been like, wow, this is so honest. It does connect you to people.
Yeah, the shame throughout all what you were saying that's so silencing is really hard to
Yeah,
push past. It's meant to keep you silent and quiet
I
and
know.
internal.
This is
It's a,
why I really encourage women to complain. Like, I really think it's helpful. You
Mhm.
have to be able to put words to your feelings and not be like embarrassed that you're being ungrateful or whatever to get started on this journey of owning whatever feels truthful and honest to you.
Can you say more about complaining? What do you mean by that? What do you wish people would be saying?
Whatever they feel, but like when I was first home with my baby, like I was so scared to be like, I don't like this. Changing diapers isn't fun because everyone had always told me like, oh my god, it's so cute, you give them a bath and you count their little toes and they're so darling, and nothing about that was fun for me. But I felt that if I said this isn't actually fun, I'm bored, I want to be like
Mhm.
in an office. I would rather be in an office doing anything than doing this. I thought that level of complaining would just make me seem like really ungrateful that I got to have a healthy baby and live in New York City and take care of the baby with all the help in the world if I needed it. And so I just kept all of that inside. But I think if I had just felt allowed to say, I'm going to do this because I want to experience it, but like I don't actually like it, that just takes so much pressure off.
Yep, no doubt, no doubt. And I do think one other aspect of your story that's important that is that like it doesn't quote unquote matter what kind of resources you have. Like this impacts everybody across the
Yeah.
board. And people have a misconception that if you have whatever, the right amount of help or the right amount of money or the right whatever, that everything will be just fine. And I think that does a disservice to people who go through this.
Look, it's a lot easier when you have help and you have resources. I'm not dumb. I know that it's easier. But if it was this miserable for me, then how brutal must it be for people who don't have what I have? And I think it's really important to talk about that because we are in the world now of a government who is increasingly removing resources for women
Right.
and making it harder for them to have any sort of subsidized support. And
Yeah,
that
it's
to me is such
terrifying.
just it's like we're in like a moment that's darker by the minute for women, right?
Yep.
And I look, there was no one that I could find willing to say most of this out loud on any rung of the economic ladder. And I felt if it was as bad for me as it was where I fall on that ladder, then it certainly wasn't easier or better for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And to what you were saying before about the kind of the moment we're in, I'm really worried about it because the I'm concerned that the rates of perinatal anxiety, depression, PTSD, all of that are just going to increase so much more.
Absolutely. If you just even think about how the government has positioned its perception of the kind of care that women's bodies deserve. Like we have a rapist in the White House. Why would a doctor feel like they have to be respectful of a woman's body?
Terrifying. And another reason why it's important to have your honesty out right now, because people need the lifeline.
Yeah.
They need to feel seen and heard in places like your book, where, okay, maybe they can't relate to every single part of your story, but there are a lot of parts of it that are very similar to what other people deal with.
A lot of it's fairly universal. And I don't know, there's no book out there where you're going to relate to every part of the story because otherwise you'd be reading your own diary and that would probably be boring. But the thing is, one thing that I hope people take away is you have to, and especially in this political climate, learn how to advocate for yourself as a woman. You have to, because otherwise it's going to eat you alive. And I didn't understand how to do that before I went into the hospital the first time. And I didn't understand how to do that when I was out of the hospital and was miserable and needed help. And my like big takeaway from those years of my life is that no one's coming to save you. You have to figure out your own boundaries and what feels right in your body and what you'll accept in terms of the kind of care that you are given both in relationships and in relationship with your doctor. And you have to delineate those things. I have a list, it's in my book, of the types of care that I require from a medical practitioner, but I didn't had that first time around, I was in there sucking up to the doctor, hoping it would make her nicer to me. Now I would be like, here's exactly what I need you to do.
Nice.
But I wasn't empowered in that way the first time around. And I hope that like the women who read my book, especially ones who haven't had a pregnancy yet, that they will learn to be more demanding of their care provider, advocate for
Absolutely.
themselves better.
Absolutely. That's a huge takeaway. And I want to touch a little bit on what I thought was a really beautiful part of your journey is how when you were healing and coming out of this, how you found connection with your son.
Yeah.
There were some just such beautiful and tender moments that maybe nobody else would have seen, but like you in your moments with him or in your heart, like I could feel that you felt like you were getting closer and opening up to that connection.
Yeah, I remember it almost making me giddy. It's like the feeling of falling in love, something romantic in a way about it because you're like getting to know this new person and you happen to have made him, which is like the coolest thing ever. But like you literally made him. That's
Mhm.
just so alien. But he, when I was able to connect more with my kid, which was after I started taking antidepressants, which I'm not on now, but were real life support for me when he was about a year old is when I started taking them. And I remember just feeling, oh, this is what it's like to love a kid. Like it's
Mhm.
a little bit one-sided because they can't give back to you like in terms of conversation or something the
Right.
way you would if you met a new friend that was becoming your best friend or something like
Mhm.
that. But they're so like open and pure and trusting and joyful and like all of the best things that humans can be all in one place and all they want to do is play and laugh and do what makes them happy. And it's such an incredible lesson to what the best humans are like.
Mhm.
And I keep saying this, but we're existing in a world right now where there are just like a lot of bad men running the show. And there's like war and destruction everywhere you look. And you just
Mhm.
think to yourself, those guys could just be more like they were when they were 5, when they were like pure and sweet and just
Mhm.
wanted to play and find joy. I don't think the world would look like it does now. Like they've lost touch with so much of what
Mhm.
makes humans special, all of which is apparent when you're little before you learn to hide it, become something else. Yeah.
Oh, that almost made me cry. That is such a beautiful thought if they could be in touch with that.
Mm.
Yeah, so you were able to get that connection with your son, and
Yeah.
you alluded to it, but in your next pregnancy, you didn't go through what you went through in your first. It was different,
I was
right?
determined not to. I have a
Mhm.
very dear friend who has 3 children, and after each of hers, she had a terrible postpartum,
Mm,
antidepressant resistant.
mm,
And she ultimately went into a program in Los Angeles, I think after her second, because she was just like, I can't do this again. I will actually die this time. And uh, she also had miserable birth scenarios with all
mm,
3. She
mm,
tried different things, but she never found the care that she deserved. And I thought I I paid a feminist midwife that I found on Instagram, the feminist midwife, Stephanie Tillman, who's like an incredible care provider, to help me develop that list of criteria that I required from a doctor. And I
yes.
like shopped around and found an OBGYN that was willing to do things like narrate what she was doing and let me have a doula.
Mhm.
And it was hard. Like plenty of people wouldn't were unwilling to meet my requirements, none of which are like that groundbreaking, but it's really not the standard of care to have the kind of care that I wanted. It
Mhm.
was trauma informed and it asked for my consent at every step. And I think like ensuring though I was incredibly sick in my pregnancy this time. I was on medical bed rest for 4 months. I went back on antidepressants for those 4 months because I knew that if there was one thing that was going to break me, it was going to be like not able to walk to the end of the block
Yeah.
for 4 months. So I was like I had way less stigma about being on them this time. So I went back on antidepressants during that time period. I felt like a big perspective shift. I tried to remain really grateful and do a lot of gratefulness practices,
Mhm.
writing my journal and stuff while I was pregnant. And I kept a really level head throughout the pregnancy, even though I was really sick and I had cholestasis of the liver at the end, which is like
Oh,
not only miserable, but also fatal at 37 weeks. So I gave birth early.
yeah.
And I was determined for my birth to be like the spiritual experience that people had told me it could be. And I got what I wanted. But I think it was
Nice.
only because I was like very committed to advocating for myself and to making sure I got what I wanted. I had one negative experience in the hospital this time, and it was at the very end after my baby was already born. I came into contact with one male doctor. I had insisted on having an all female team. It was incredible. Two of the anesthesiologists were pregnant. They both had amazing nails and great fake lashes, and I just totally got along with them from the jump. But at the very end, a man came in to remove my epidural, and he was awful. He was so rude. In the 1.5 minutes he was in my room, he managed to ruin
Ugh,
the vibe
that sucks.
completely.
That
And I was, yeah, if I don't know his name, and he's lucky because I would find him, but miserable. But other than that, I had like only wonderful care this time, and it made such a difference. I was able to be fully present with my daughter from the moment that she came out, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. And I think that's the kind of birth that like every person deserves. But unfortunately, with the medical system the way it is now, you don't get that if you don't know how to advocate for yourself and what to ask for.
Absolutely.
My book's available anywhere you can buy books. I narrate it. So, if the sound of my voice doesn't totally irk you, it was really fun to do the audio for my book.
Yeah.
Like, it was like one of my favorite parts. It was so
Mhm.
great. But I will say, I don't think it's just for women who have had kids. I really hope that men read it. I really hope that people who are on the fence about having kids read it and who haven't had kids yet will read it, because I think even if my circumstances aren't the same as someone else's, I think there are universal takeaways. But also, I hope more than anything that it encourages women to tell their truth and to be brave about sharing the parts about womanhood that like don't resonate with them and that they don't like, because I felt so alone when I was going through this, and it's only because there's a lack of stories out there. And I think, like, by truth telling, we have to say our stories so loud that the men who are in office who make decisions about our bodies on our behalf can't ignore them anymore. They're trying really hard to ignore them. They're trying really hard to pretend that our stories aren't being told. So we have to be louder until they can't do that anymore.
Yeah. And you definitely are meeting that. It's a necessary story to have out there. And as yes, I did say I read the book. I loved listening to it. Like for me personally, if I don't like the voice of the narrator, I can't listen, even if it's a really compelling book. And I listened throughout in probably
Thank you.
record time. It was great. It was a great read. And as a psychologist therapist working with moms who have very similar experiences that you have, I personally appreciate your honesty because I definitely hear the stories of people who feel alone because they don't hear examples like yours or details like you're providing. And if this is, it can be a lifeline to somebody else, then wow, what an impact you've had. Yeah. So thank you so much for taking time to be on and sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Please go search for the Motherload episodes from the Brink of Motherhood by Sarah Hoover wherever you get your books. And you can also go to her website, sarahhoover.com, and also find her on Instagram at Sarah Hoove. And if you know of anybody who could benefit from hearing her story, hearing this conversation, please send this podcast episode along. As we talked about a lot in this episode, the more that people know that these realities exist, the more likely they are to see that within themselves and get the support and help they need to heal from perinatal mental health conditions. Make sure you follow or subscribe this podcast so that you get every episode downloaded directly to you when it comes out every Monday and every other Thursday. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.